Well, Kichi, merci, Nika and Sarah for chairing this panel, and really to everyone who is organizing and ensuring that this conference runs smoothly. Tanche Tarah Hogue Nishinakashan. I'm joining you today from beautiful Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And this watercolor is the place to start. So this is a sort of modest watercolor portrait by Emily Carr of Sewinchelwet, Sophie Frank, who was a highly accomplished basket maker from the Squamish Nation. This painting was also at the center of an exhibition that I curated at the Vancouver Art Gallery in 2020 called Lineages and Land Bases. I'm going to be giving you a very sort of introductory look at the exhibition and some of the questions that it raised in regards to Sophie and Emily's relationship. There's a lot more to say than I can say in 10 minutes, and I'm certainly not an expert in the area, but it was a great first step into this research. So in 2018, I was introduced to Talalsum Kane CM Bill Williams, who is a hereditary chief of the Squamish Nation, as someone who could help guide the gallery in building more meaningful and reciprocal relationships with the host nation, so Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam, who share territory in the Vancouver Lower Mainland. So CM is the great-grandnephew of Sophie Frank and holds the story of his great-aunt's relationship with Emily Carr, which was passed to him by his grandmother, Sewinchelwet Monica Williams, who was Sophie's sister. Around the same time that I was introduced to CM, and totally independent from this meeting, the gallery was negotiating the long-term loan of this portrait. So the kind of stars aligning moment happened. And this sort of fortuitous confluence of events catalyzed the Lineages and Land Bases exhibition, which Chief Bill, CM, and Tracy Williams, who is an expert weaver also from the Squamish Nation, were advisors for. So characteristic of the focus of Uninvited on women artists who have been excluded from the canon of Canadian art, Sewinchelwet's presence in the art historical record is marked by multiple layers of exclusion, including the erasure of Coast Salish visible presence from the fabric of the city that was, built on top of and displaced the community that she is from. And this is an erasure that the Vancouver Art Gallery itself participated in, sort of first by deeming Indigenous art the purview of the ethnographic collections at the Museum of Anthropology and Museum of Vancouver, and then by choosing to elevate more northern Northwest Coast forms to the status of art, while largely disregarding Coast Salish cultural production. Next slide, please. So the exhibition placed Carr and Frank's lives and creative practices at the central point, both physically and conceptually, of a larger exhibition of contemporary art that challenged the assumed divide between nature and culture that we know kind of underpins the shaping of the idea of Canadian national identity and art in the 20th century. So here you see 3 baskets by women from Squamish communities. The one on the right is by Sewinchelwet. The central basket is by her sister, Sewinchelwet, and the one on the left is by Marianne August. So we're very lucky to know the names of the women who made the baskets in this exhibition. Behind the baskets are 4 of Carr's oil on paper paintings made after 1934, which are considered to be some of her most, vibrant and fluid expressions of her experience and understanding of interconnection with the land. So this gallery's reflection on the 33-year friendship between Carr and Frank really borrows a lot and owes a lot to Christina Huno's research in her book, I'm Not Myself at All, Women, Art, and Subjectivity in Canada, which explore ideas of personhood and subjectivity that are related to the natural world and embedded, in this case, within the materials and processes of basketry and painting. So Huno's writing points to the differences, as she says, between, on the one hand, the material products of looking at nature, the paintings, and on the other, those that result from working with it, the baskets, which is a comparison that is obviously exemplified in the work of Carr and Frank. So Christina did extensive consultation with Squamish communities and brought many of those women artists' names forward for the art historical record. So I know she's on the session today, so I have to thank Christina for being so open to my sort of my curatorial interpretation of your scholarship. Next slide, please. Perfect. So this is a picture of Emily Carr in her Victoria studio taken by the commercial photographer Harry Upperton Knight. And of course, in the photo, you see Carr's portrait of her friend Sophie hung on the wall behind her. And one of the things that Chief Bill shared with me was that when Sophie died in 1939, Emily had a difficult time letting go of her friend. And she kept this portrait close to her until she herself passed in 1945. And there's an inscription on the reverse of painting where Carr bequeaths the work to Ira Dilworth, and it reads, quote, "The original portrait of Sophie, done probably in Vancouver around 1907 or 1908, we actually know it was 1914, at my death, the property of Ira Dilworth of CBC from his love, Emily, because the life of Sophie meant so much to him. He understood her womanliness and my love for her. To him, she was more than just an Indian, she was a symbol," end quote. Now, to a contemporary reader, this is a loaded statement to unpack, which really sort of opens on to a very rich discussion of how Carr represented Sophie in her writings. Both Christina as well as Shirley Bear and Susan Crean have commented on this in their respective research. So in the 2006 publication, Emily Carr, New Perspectives on a Canadian Icon, Bear and Crean write, quote, "To spend time piecing together Sophie's story from Emily's fairly extensive record, only Carr's sisters got more journal space, is to be forced to contemplate the way Carr altered and obfuscated both Sophie and her history," end quote. Next slide, please. So in this one very dense room of the exhibition, we attempted to bring forward multiple and complex readings of Emily and Sophie's relationship, which, includes an engagement with the sort of fairly extensive academic and art historical engagement with Carr's work, as well as the oral history and cultural knowledge held by people like Chief Bill and Tracy Williams. As Chief Bill tells it, following Emily and Sophie's fortuitous meeting in Vancouver in 1906, when Sophie was selling her baskets door to door, with her kids in tow, over the course of their 33-year-long friendship, Sophie shared Squamish cultural teachings with Emily, which of course emphasize a human interconnection with the land, which is deeply embedded in the baskets that Sophie made. Chief Bill asserts that this experience had a profound impact on Carr's work and her representation of the forest that she's beloved for, and which have in many ways been used to represent what we know today as British Columbia. So here you see the watercolor portrait installed alongside the photo of Carr in her studio and a digital and hard copy cover of Clewick, where Emily Carr first writes about her meeting Sophie. alongside a biography that focused on Carr's family and the encounters that shaped her artistic development in an attempt to bring a perhaps more Indigenous approach to writing Carr's biography, or to parallel the kind of information that we were able to share of Sophie Frank. You also see a small selection of Carr's ceramics, which are an unsettling aspect of her holdings at the Vancouver Art Gallery's collection for their kind of flagrant and really poor appropriation of Northwest Coast iconography. And it's a little small in this image, unfortunately, at least on my screen, but the ceramics are shown alongside a really brilliant innovation of basketry, thank you, which is the goblet-shaped basket you see there, which is by Palaquia Margaret Baker, another woman from the Squamish Nation. So, shown together, these works show how these women artists in the 1920s, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, had to adapt their work to the pressures of the market and for their own survival. And, of course, these pressures were by no means equal. But, Carr describes hating herself for what she called, quote unquote, prostituting Indian art, while in the same breath saying that she did keep the Indian design pure. So, kind of giving herself permission. We also have a letter written to Carr by Sophie. There's 3 of those that are in the archive in Victoria, where she explains that, quote, "I buy all our food. I have not been working in my garden, for I am in Vancouver every day trying to sell baskets," end quote. So, here you see how Carr and Frank lived in an unevenly shared reality. And quite recently, the Vancouver Art Gallery librarian, Jane Devine-Meha, which I believe is on the talk today also, uncovered a very small newspaper clipping from the province advertising Carr's 1913 exhibition at Dominion Hall, where she showed the paintings that she made following her travels to the islands of the Northwest Coast, including Haida Gwaii, and as well as the upper Skeena River Valley, as well as where she delivered her lecture on totems. And the brief description of the events is followed by a sentence that reads, "Indian basket sale each afternoon." So Carr may have been active in trying to support the sale of her friend Sophie's, as well as other Salish basket makers. So it's another kind of small, tantalizing piece of the puzzle that we have to think about now. Next slide, please. So I wish I had a better image of this photograph to share with you. It's from the Squamish-Lillooet Cultural Center, and you see Emily Carr in the center with a cedar root and her friend Sewinchelwet Sophie Frank. And I had to include it because it's just such a joyful image, I think. And you have the baby in the basket there, which is just so great. So I'll just conclude by saying that my intention with this display was to, again, really kind of bring forward the complexity of Carr's relationship and lives, and the way in which Carr, represented their relationship, as well as representing Indigenous cultural material more broadly. So the exhibition was meant in a kind of modest way, recognizing that there's a lot more work that can be done, but to both raise the story and the really brilliant work of Squamish weavers like Sophie, first and foremost in the territories where they are from and where their story, really should hold a place of primacy. And also to challenge those of us who do curate collections of Canadian art, or Carr's work more specifically, to think about our priorities. Whose stories are we telling, and why? And how can we really ever tell Carr's story the same way again without Sophie, or at least without prioritizing the knowledge and stories of those who are from the territories where she lived and where she painted. So there's a lot more that can be considered here, and I did co-write a piece for the Capilano Review with my colleague Ashley Connery on about this exhibition, if you're interested in supporting that journal. So Kishi Marci, thank you very much.